1 year of war, at least 400,000 dead, most of them Russians. Cities destroyed, civilians murdered, women raped, children stolen. The world brought to the edge of nuclear holocaust. And for what? Russia wanted all of Ukraine, and for all that blood, it got so little. Its feared war machine, buckets of rust on ruined roads. But Russia still has weapons to launch at cities, and it still has soldiers, conscripts and convicts to sacrifice. Can Ukraine hold out? Will the Western world stand strong? This is a Scripps News special, No Surrender, Ukraine 1 year later, with Jason Bellini and Chan Seals.
Welcome from Kyiv, where the past year has been defined by defying the odds. It is a matter of life and death.
And from Washington, where President Biden is vowing to keep up his administration's support for Ukraine at whatever cost, for however long. This hour, the war that shocked the world. And Jason, you've been there since the earliest days, showing us how Ukrainians are rising up every day in every way, leading the resistance.
Well, nobody here wanted this war chance, but one man did, Vladimir Putin, who launched this invasion 1 year ago. What has marked this past year, in addition to the brutality, is the spirit of the Ukrainian people, the determination to fight. It has meant the difference that has so far saved their country.
Russia has troops built up in border areas that we're going to show you here, nearly 100,000.
The clouds of war gathered in January of last year as tens of thousands of Russian troops amassed near the Ukrainian border. And then 1 year ago on this night, the storm broke.
Ukraine's president called it, quote, declaration of war against the whole of Europe.
Dozens, maybe hundreds of troops and civilians already dead in less than 24 hours.
As the war began, we came to Poland, and then Lviv, Ukraine, just across the border. With airspace closed and Russian forces moving in, a steady stream of Ukrainians, more than 100,000, were rushing to safety. The women forced to leave their men behind, to stay and fight.
Putin start war in our country, and we can't understand what he will do.
You don't know what he's going to do.
And I think you also don't know what he will do, and no one knows because it's crazy, man.
Then, just as quickly, panic hardened into resolve. The Ukrainian resistance, backed by American-led Western support, was fierce. Russia's plans for a swift invasion and the fall of Ukraine were shattered. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recorded this video on the streets of the capital, refusing to surrender, refusing to evacuate, saying, "We are here." Across Ukraine, everyday people found their own front lines and took a stand. An orphanage director in Kherson hiding 50 children from the invaders. A citizen war crimes investigator in Kharkiv dodging Russian shells to gather evidence. The spirit of resistance was everywhere. Back in Russia, President Vladimir Putin was gloating. He staged this rally 3 weeks into the war, trying to drum up domestic support. But later that month, NATO reported up to 15,000 Russian soldiers were already dead. Zelensky said thousands of Ukrainians had already been killed, including hundreds who were sheltering at a theater in Mariupol, where children was written outside the building.
Indeed, this is genocide. The elimination of the whole nation and the people.
Outside the capital, in Bucha, retreating Russian forces executed civilians. President Biden formally accused Russia of war crimes in early April, then genocide days later. We later met families there lining up for DNA tests to try to determine if their loved ones were among the dead. President Zelensky witnessed the aftermath in Bucha firsthand. More powerful weapons from the West came more swiftly. Backed by U.S. intelligence, Ukraine notched meaningful victories, like the sinking of Russia's flagship, the Moskva. Russia fought back against civilians, which we witnessed firsthand in places like Borodyanka. People living there told us Russians shot anyone trying to rescue the injured. Ukrainian ingenuity has shown through, like these people we met sending drones to the front lines to pinpoint Russian positions, acting as spotters for Ukrainian artillery.
Our artillery software is being used by 95% of our artillery guys, armed forces, I mean. So you can imagine how much damage that has caused.
This past year has exposed the pain caused by Putin's decision to invade and the strength of the Ukrainian people. From the new mothers who gave birth behind barriers in the basements of maternity wards, to the young chairman of Ukraine's railway, dedicated to keeping the trains running on time across the country's 16,000 miles of track. We met a young man left disfigured when Russians fired missiles into a resort where he was celebrating his college graduation. He was lucky to have survived it all. 22 people died. The sniper dubbed Ukraine's Joan of Arc, and the people fighting to save the animals, from horses to dogs to cats. All signs of a continuing humanity in the face of horror.
And one more layer here, sanctions. The West has sanctioned Russia since the first days of this invasion. U.S. officials say Russia is now the most sanctioned country on the planet. But let's be honest, it hasn't had the impact they hoped. Russia's economy did shrink last year, just over 2%, but this year Russia's economy is expected to grow, potentially outperforming the United Kingdom. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull has been covering President Biden's trip to Poland this week, and she joins me now from Warsaw. Haley, Western sanctions have hurt Moscow, but they haven't been enough to stop the war.
Jason, President Biden has been opposed to direct military conflict, but said sanctions would cripple Russia's economy, that the impact would, quote, rival military might. Now, the Russian economy has certainly been hurt, but is also expected to grow this year. Defensive measures from Russia's central bank, as well as incoming funds from oil and natural gas exports, have helped prop up their economy and help them lessen the impact of the sanctions. Here in Poland this week, though, Biden announced that there would be more sanctions, we are hearing, on Russian logistics and manufacturing companies. Listen to him speaking to allies in Warsaw this week.
Because what literally is at stake is not just Ukraine, it's freedom. The idea that over 100,000 forces would invade another country after war, since World War II, nothing like that has happened. Things have changed radically, and we have to make sure we change them back.
Hey, let's talk about how the week started. President Biden surprising the world with a trip to Kyiv. He snuck out of the U.S., spent 20 hours in transit. He was on the ground here in Kyiv for about 5 hours. What's the lasting impact of that trip into Kyiv?
It was certainly a historical trip, as you've described. The impact here is the strong message that the trip likely sent to Ukraine, to allies, and likely also Russia about the U.S.'s commitment to not only Ukraine's defense, but also the NATO alliance. The image of both President Biden and President Zelensky standing together in Kyiv with the air raid sirens going in the background is certainly a symbol of the president doubling down on that message. And the timing is very important as Ukraine looks to more aid as the attacks continue, as Putin Putin does not show signs of letting up the aggression. And with the changing security landscape for European allies, big picture, we spoke with the U.S. ambassador to Poland, who says the U.S. trip shows the sign that the collective defense is working and a common understanding of the challenge, which he explained is a starting point for pushing back against Putin longer. That visit appeared well received by NATO allies as well as Ukraine President Zelensky, saying it brings victory closer. Jason.
Well, Biden's visit to Kyiv was certainly a morale boost. Haley Bull traveling from the White House to Poland this week for this important trip. We'll see you back here in just a bit. Chance, sending it back to you in Washington.
All right, appreciate it. And just seeing that, again, it's the latest marker in this year-long filing of reports that we see the human beings that are affected with every bit here. So powerful stuff there. We're going to check back in with you in just a moment, Jason, as we bring our viewers your brand new reporting documenting evidence of war crimes in Kharkiv. And another powerful profile, and you get to the essence of the experience, a combat medic on the front lines. Plus, my interview with Congressman John Garamendi. How much of the billions in U.S. aid to Ukraine is actually making it to the front lines? He just went there to find out. And the race for intelligence. Former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta sits down with Scripps News.
And I have to tell you, human intelligence is probably the most important intelligence you can have.
This is a Scripps News special, No Surrender, Ukraine, 1 year later.
President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. He could end the war with a word. It's simple.
President Biden in his final moments of his trip to Poland, and here to where I'm standing in Kyiv. This is a Scripps News special. Later this hour, I'll bring you brand new reporting detailing how Ukrainians are documenting Russian war crimes. I saw it firsthand in Kharkiv. But for now, Chance, back to you in Washington.
Jason, we're looking forward to that. Think back to the earliest days of this war. President Vladimir Putin believed he could invade, Zelensky would flee or die, and the country would fall in days. Here we are exactly 1 year later, and none of that came true. How? A big reason is intelligence. Our national security correspondent Sasha Ingber reports.
The war started on bad intelligence, with Russia assessing Kyiv would fall in a few days. And in a year of fighting as the underdog, Ukrainians have seen how intelligence is a priceless weapon.
What they found is what we all have learned. You cannot win a battle without good intelligence. We are, in fact, empowered by Putin's mistakes.
Former CIA Director and Defense Secretary Leon Panetta tells Scripps News Ukrainians have sources within the Russian army and across Ukraine, helping them outpace Russian intelligence.
I don't think there's any question that Putin, and for that matter, Russian commanders, are not getting very good intelligence about what exactly is happening to Russian forces. I think they're operating on the hope that somehow things can turn around on the battlefield. And that is a premise that, frankly, nobody should rely on.
Ukraine has held Kyiv, hit Russian sites, and killed generals using their own intelligence, American intelligence, and commercial technology like Elon Musk's Starlink terminals and Palantir's artificial intelligence.
Whether it's AI, whether it's open source intelligence, whether it's intelligence from spies on the ground, or whether it's intelligence from technology, either satellites or communication technology, all of that is what gives you the intelligence that you need in order to win a war.
But Ukrainians have also innovated. Last year, they tricked Russians with wood decoys of rocket systems. And as Russian morale plummeted, Ukraine set up a hotline for Russian soldiers to surrender and a website for Russian families to search for relatives at war. They used chatbots to turn Ukrainian civilians into informants, and they're crowdfunding fleets of naval drones and other weapons with the help of a Star Wars actor.
Join the fundraiser for 10 Hydrant drones that will help perform reconnaissance missions.
They're turning open source intelligence into a lethal art, striking locations where Russian service members casually post geotagged photos on social media. And they're still intercepting conversations by cell phone and radio. The Russian Defense Ministry blaming a deadly New Year's attack in Makivka on troops' unpermitted cell phone usage. But despite Vladimir Putin's depleted force, with daily casualty rates estimated above 800, he still has a manpower advantage. And Russian military analyst Kostas Tigos says some evidence points to fighters adapting.
They're increasing their intelligence collection and exploitation activities, and they're also introducing new equipment.
British intelligence assesses that Russia is likely now using balloons with radar reflectors to surveil Ukrainian air defense systems. A Chinese satellite company the U.S. recently sanctioned has allegedly provided Russian paramilitary group Wagner with synthetic aperture radar imagery, allowing them to see through vegetation and clouds to plan for future operations. Tigos says Russia is methodically using electronic warfare systems behind the front lines and trying to evade detection.
And the State Department's counselor, Derek Chollet, tells me that the U.S. intelligence community is working through why it wrongly assessed that Kyiv would fall in a few days. Meanwhile, Secretary Panetta tells me that the U.S. intelligence community was relying on old information and that they need more human sources in both Russia and Ukraine.
Ingber, stay with me. I also want to bring back in Haley Bull from Warsaw, Poland, and here in the U.S., Nathaniel Reed on Capitol Hill, Alex Miller covering the United Nations. Alex, let's start with you. Ukraine has urged the UN, just stop Russia's aggression. Whatever it takes, stop it. Why is that not happening?
Well, it really highlights what the role of the UN actually is. The UN General Assembly can continue to pass resolutions, and it is as recently as this afternoon. But those resolutions, Chance, are not binding. The only potentially legally binding resolutions come out of the Security Council, and Russia has veto power there. Not only do they have this veto power, but so does China, and both of them are members, are permanent members, so they are able to speak every single time there is a session. Even the UN Secretary General has said that the climate is not ripe for negotiations between these two parties right now. And even more so, he says he fears that there is a wider war that could be coming down the pike, including other countries. And so right now, the UN is much more focused on bringing people to the table, even though they know that right now they say the climate is just not ripe for it.
Haley, there are these ongoing frustrations with the UN. So we've heard Ukraine say its security, its future at this point lies with NATO. Where do things stand on joining that alliance?
It's no secret that is something Ukraine would eventually like. NATO's Secretary General said last week that their position hasn't changed from where it was more than a decade ago when they agreed Ukraine would become a member. But right now, the focus is on supporting Ukraine's defense and making sure it remains a sovereign country.
Nate, President Zelensky addressed Congress last year. You covered it. He urged them to keep helping Ukraine publicly, monetarily, every way they can. Now Republicans are in charge of the House of Representatives, and some are opposed to sending more money. Is aid going to keep flowing?
Well, Chance, a month before that address before Congress, a number of Republican members of Congress, including Representatives Matt Gaetz and Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, held a press conference where they effectively told reporters, if we win a majority, which of course they did, we will not vote for another dollar of aid to Ukraine. Of course, Zelensky came less than a month later asking for additional aid for his country. But there are some positive signs for Ukraine looking for additional aid from the U.S. Congress. For one, the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Representative Michael McCall, the Republican, just finished a wartime visit to Kyiv with a number of Republican representatives. He also pushed for additional aid as part of that trip, saying that the U.S. needs to continue to supply additional aid to our Ukrainian partners. But the ultimate decision over whether additional aid goes to Ukraine doesn't lie with Michael McCall. It lies with Speaker Kevin McCarthy. It's going to be up to Kevin McCarthy whether he wants to put any future bill on the floor of the House of Representatives to receive a vote and send additional aid.
And Sasha, in the beginning, we hear maybe Vladimir Putin had bad intel or bad advice, yes men around him. But at this point, he has eyes. He has a brain. He can see what's happening. What is his end game at this point? What do your sources think he's likely to do next?
Well, to start, Putin often likes to hit hard and attack on holidays and anniversaries, so Ukraine is rightfully bracing for what could potentially be a barrage for the first-year anniversary of this war. Now, the CIA assesses that Putin is not serious about negotiating and that Russia is now trying to cut off the flow of intelligence that the United States is receiving. And they also believe that Putin is in this for the long haul, that he is digging in, and he's still betting that Western support will fade over time. And that is ultimately problematic because it could be an existential crisis that he is facing. He might believe that by staying in this war, he doesn't have to say that he has lost. And we have ultimately seen a much more weakened Putin. You'll remember, Chance, that he used to make foreign leaders wait. Now we've seen multiple videos of him making other foreign counterparts wait. And he met just this week in Moscow, not with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, but a top Chinese diplomat. Russia was very eager to show that they still have that relationship at a time when Russia is being sanctioned and obviously incredibly isolated. What is notable is that now the Chinese are proposing a peace plan that we are waiting to see, and they, unlike the CIA, have reaffirmed that Putin and Russia are very much willing to negotiate.
A lot of uncertainty about the months ahead. Haley, Nate, Sasha, Alex, thank you all for helping us understand this a bit better. Just a few minutes from now, we're going to hear from a leading U.S. congressman about how much American aid is actually making it to the front lines as promised. But first, let's get back to Jason Bellini in Kyiv, where this war is now officially, Jason, in its second year.
Officially in that second year, Chance. Well, it's easy to focus on the numbers here, the number of dead, the number of refugees, the number of troops deployed. But a driving mission of our coverage has been to put names and faces behind it all. It's a similar mission for award-winning photographer Lindsay Adario, who just won a Polk Award for her coverage of the war here. She talked with us this week about her work.
I am Lindsay Adario. I am a photojournalist. I work with the New York Times and National Geographic as a freelance photographer. I think there's a real unpredictability in this war that makes things more difficult because nowhere is really safe. You can be sitting in your kitchen, you can be walking down the street on your way to the gym, and a missile can come out of nowhere. The early days of the war in Ukraine were incredibly chaotic and hectic. I think no one really knew what to expect. There was a large civilian exodus out of the suburbs around Kiev, the suburbs of Bucha and Irpin. Many of the people fleeing were elderly, injured, vulnerable, a lot of children and women. There was a lot of shelling in the distance. So we ran across the street to a building which provided some cover, and very soon after that, a series of rounds started coming in, artillery rounds. And I was so furious as I was photographing because I thought, it's so horrific that these women and children have to go through this, with fighting in the distance. And I remember looking and seeing the body of a child. And I was trying to sort of connect the dots, which was very hard to do because I was in shock. And I looked at the boots, and there were these little sort of moon boots, like puffy boots. And I thought, oh, that's a child. And I have 2 children myself. And then I had to sort of remind myself, no, photograph, like you are here to do a job. This is a photograph from the early days of the war in Kiev, and it's in a maternity ward. And at that point, Kiev was under bombardment daily. In a maternity ward where women are supposed to be enjoying one of the most blissful moments of their lives. Families are supposed to be experiencing these blissful moments, and instead, all of these women who had just given birth, who were in labor, who were requiring additional medical support after giving birth, were in a moldy basement, sort of, seeking shelter beneath a maternity ward in a hospital. So that is Oleg and his wife were sitting at their kitchen table in January when a missile with a warhead that is 2,000 pounds, a missile that is normally used to sink Navy ships, was fired into their residential building in Dnipro, a city in the east. And that missile took the lives of 46 people, injured dozens, and even evaporated some of the apartments in that building. It's very difficult to get across the human aspect of this war. It's very difficult to engage readers that have been looking at these images for a year. Between Ukrainian photographers and international photographers, we've been able to keep Ukraine in the public eye, to hold Putin accountable for the war crimes and for what continues to go on. And I think it's very important to keep covering this war.
Lindsay Adario sharing her remarkable work with us. Up next, two vital pieces of reporting. I'll take you inside the city of Kharkiv to show you the painstaking task of documenting Russian war crimes. I just got back from there to bring you this insight. And Chance will speak with Congressman John Garamendi, who returned from Ukraine days ago. How much U.S. aid is making it to the front lines?
This is a Scripps News special, No Surrender, Ukraine 1 year later. Here again, Jason Bellini and Chance Seals.
Welcome back to the Scripps News special alongside Jason Bellini in Kyiv. I'm Chance Seals in Washington. In just a moment, my interview with Democratic Congressman and Armed Services Committee member John Garamendi. How much U.S. aid is actually making it to the front lines in Ukraine? But Jason, we want to get back to you first because we know you're just back from near the front lines.
Well, that's right. I was just in the town of Kharkiv. It's about a 6-hour drive to the east from where I'm standing right now. It was liberated from Russian control late last year in September. And what the Ukrainians uncovered to show the world were brutal scars of horrific aggression. Now, the painstaking effort to document what appears to be war crimes is underway. I saw it firsthand.
These thousands of rockets, missiles, shells brought terror to Ukraine's second largest city. The field is unmarked for fear of attracting a Russian strike, and we've obscured details that could help identify its location, because now this is evidence of war crimes.
Wings.
Meticulously collected.
X-55 rockets.
It's a painstaking process, says prosecutor Dmytro Chebenko.
Yeah, titanium. This is engine of rocket.
What's this right here?
Most of these shells are numbered, Chubenko says. That's how prosecutors record the addresses where the missiles were found. After each attack, we take photos and videos, record the GPS coordinates of the damaged site and the GPS coordinates of the remains of the missiles, he says. War crimes cases require specificity, all the way down to presenting in a courtroom which missile destroyed which hospital, which school, which playground. Even after a long time, in a year, 2, 3, or more, we can reconstruct the circumstances of the war crimes, he says.
This is fewer than half of the missiles that they've collected here in Kharkiv. There's another missile graveyard about this same size. And then there are the missiles that didn't explode that are too dangerous to keep here.
The ones in this field, destroyed, maimed, killed.
What is the most advanced missile that is here?
These are cruise missiles, Chebenko says. They're very expensive and quite accurate. They cost $2, $3, $4 million for one missile. Proving Russian intent to hit a civilian target may prove challenging. That's why specific missile details matter. These are very important missiles for us, he says. This material evidence will prove the guilt of Russia's top military and political leadership, the culpability of Putin, the Minister of Defense, the commanders, for the murders of civilians. Chubenko says his office estimates that these missiles that hit Kharkiv cost Russia more than $100 million. What they cost Ukraine in lives ruined and taken, incalculable.
When the Ukrainians chased the Russians over the bridge and out of Kharkiv, it marked yet another embarrassing defeat for President Putin. An analysis from the New York Times and Institute for the Study of War found Ukraine has now reclaimed more than half, 54% of the land Russia captured since the start of the war. You can see those areas there in blue. The areas Russia still controls are in light red. Chance, that statistic adding to the senselessness of Putin's invasion.
Jason Bellini, powerful reporting. Ukraine's military successes can be traced directly back to U.S. weapons and intelligence, but is everything being sent by the United States actually making it to the front lines as intended? Congressman John Garamendi, Democrat of California, is a member of the House Armed Services Committee, and he just returned this week from a trip to the Ukrainian border. Congressman, I know you had concerns about whether American equipment sent to Ukraine was actually making it to the front lines, and corruption has been a worry since the beginning. What'd you find?
Well, we went with Chairman Rogers, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and 5 other members, 4 Republicans, 1 other Democrat, specifically to look at that situation. Are the weapons actually getting to the front line? We looked at all the documentation. Greece, about 10% of the weapons flow through Greece, another 10% through Romania, and the balance 80% through Poland. We did the documentation. We looked at the documents. We looked at the locations, the equipment that was in transit, and came away with a high level of satisfaction that the equipment is getting into Ukraine.
President Biden was criticized this week for traveling to Ukraine, not to East Palestine, Ohio, where the train that was hauling the toxic chemicals derailed, caught fire. People say they're very sick right now. I know you're a proud Democrat, sir, but if we can set party affiliation aside, is President Biden prioritizing foreign issues over domestic problems?
The foreign issue, that is the Ukraine war, is an American issue. This is right into the gut of America. We are members of NATO. The fight is now. The moment is now. We have to be there with Ukraine this year and quite possibly into the next year. It is a whole lot cheaper to be fighting this battle for democracy, for freedom in Ukraine than it would be in the Western Pacific or in the NATO countries. Finally, the president has not backed away from the United States. Take a look at his travel schedule. He was in the Midwest last week, days before he got on Air Force One and went to Poland, and then on to Kyiv. He was in those same states. In Ohio, he was in Ohio for a major bridge improvement over the Ohio River in Cleveland.
Not East Palestine, sir, I'm sorry. With respect, though, maybe being in the same state, but I mean, I read in the New York Times, President Biden said, I want to go to Kyiv. That was a Friday. He started going on Sunday. It's been 15 days and nobody from the cabinet had been there. And finally, Pete Buttigieg goes. That's a long time.
I want America to take a look at the president's schedule. There are major catastrophes across this nation virtually every day. And the president often is at those. He was in California for the flooding situation. He was in other parts of the nation. The East Palestine train derailment is serious, no doubt about it. As to whether Buttigieg should have been there earlier or not, I don't. That's up to the secretary to determine. But the first response in East Palestine is the responsibility of the government of Ohio. And it was 10 days before the governor of Ohio requested FEMA's support.
Finally, Congressman, Ukrainian President Zelensky says he and President Biden are hopeful this war on his country is going to end this year, 2023. You were just there. Are you hopeful?
I'm hopeful that the spring offensive will push the Russians back and create an opportunity for Ukraine to negotiate from strength.
Congressman John Garamendi, just back from Ukraine. Thank you, sir. Ahead, she's the woman dubbed Ukraine's Joan of Arc, a sniper, and soon a new mom. We'll update the story of Emerald, who you first met here a few months back. Where is she today?
You're watching a Scripps News special, No Surrender, Ukraine, 1 year later.
Back here in Kyiv with a view from a recent reporting trip to near the front lines as this war officially enters its second year. You're about to meet a woman, a combat medic who risks her life every day to rush into danger under the constant threat of Russian attacks to save as many lives as she can. And she shared some video with us showing the world what she's witnessed. This is Yara's story.
A Ukrainian fighter and her unit's medic helps evacuate yet another fallen comrade. A GoPro camera on the helmet of Yara Chorno who's captured this time-lapsed video and the exhaustion and grit of her unit urgently pushing through the forest, trying to save their fallen friend. When every minute can mean life or death, frontline combat medics like Yara are a lifeline.
You are constantly under tank, artillery, and mortar shelling. Infantry of occupants are just 100 meters away from you, and you can be wounded with bullets in any moment.
Before we met, we didn't know much about her, but there was something about Yara, from her Instagram photos alone, that promised a rare window into the bloody reality of this war. The only way to meet her: travel to her location in the Donbass region near the most fierce fighting of the war in Bakhmut.
To visit Yara, we've come to Lyman. It's a town that's just a few miles away from the front line. We hear the artillery fire already. This is your ambulance.
We prefer armored car, you know. Here we have tank shelling and artillery shelling almost every day. This is what we face every day. We have to use like a Mitsubishi wagon for evacuation. Yeah. Let's go, let's move back.
From this destroyed village, home now mainly to Ukrainian fighters, Yara speeds back and forth to the front line in her makeshift ambulance.
Why do you have an American flag?
It's just to irritate occupants and Russians.
The mission of Yara's unit: fight and gather military intelligence, bringing them so close to enemy fighters that they can see them.
You just came back from the front line?
That's right.
What's it like out there right now?
The last few weeks, Russians are trying to push the front line. They try to use moments when we haven't got a new portion of tanks and artillery and cannons. So they are digging very close to our position, like 70 or 100 meters away from us.
Unending Russian fire is killing and injuring Ukrainian forces in devastating numbers.
I don't feel any emotions when I see wounds. Or
No,
not anymore. Not after a year and a half on the front line. I have some emotions about maybe dead bodies, but only after we evacuated them.
Do you have to bring dead bodies in your car?
Yes. So this car is basically for wounded and the ones who were killed. Hi.
You have a snake tattoo. What's the snake?
The snake, the symbol of wisdom, at the same time, symbol of medicine.
Yara's ambulance carries the wounded and dead daily.
What's been the hardest day for you?
We were unable to evacuate the dead body of one of our mates. We didn't have enough artillery, and that's why we had to step back to the line behind, and his body is still there.
Doctors treat patients, combat medics treat friends who are more like family.
I have in memory lots of my mates, friends who are killed, and this gives me motivation to fight.
The ghosts of the dead urging her on in the name of freedom and life.
A glimpse of the life and death reality of the front lines. Chance?
Yeah, Jason, it's a tough to watch reminder that war is mortars, it's missiles, but really at its heart, it's people. Up next, Jason Bellini is back with us from Kyiv to update the story of one of the bravest women he's met, a sniper named Emerald. now she's about to be a new mom.
This is a Scripps News special, No Surrender, Ukraine, 1 year later.
Over the past year, we've profiled dozens of Ukrainians making a difference in their country. We've met people who make it their mission to save animals or rescue children or document war crimes. And then there's Emerald, the sniper we first introduced you to in the fall. She had fought on the front lines, met the love of her life, and was preparing to bring new life into this world. We checked in with her here in Kyiv.
The sound of a Russian drone on the front lines, hovering near Yevgenia Emerald. It's trying to find us, she says. If it sees her, she knows what sound could come next. The whiz, then bang of incoming artillery. Spot the target, dial it in, and fire. It's a tactic she knows well, because Emerald is a sniper.
Did you have a nickname?
Yes.
What?
Ukrainian Jeanne d'Arc.
Ukrainian Joan of Arc. That title and her bright eyes and flaming red hair, the army emblazoned on a patch they made for her. While serving on the front lines, she would meet the love of her life, and in a forest surrounded by soldiers, have the closest thing a war zone has to a fairy tale wedding. The couple was also already on the way to becoming a family. Emerald was pregnant and would soon leave the battlefield, returning home to Kyiv. That's where we caught up with her, now about to give birth in March. Emerald has become a well-known name here in Ukraine. Her new front line is a nonprofit devoted to women in combat. They send everything to the front, all the necessary things, she says, because many women have been serving right from the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Not everyone has the opportunity to come to Kyiv to take what they need. At their warehouse in Kyiv, Emerald shows us uniforms made to keep women warm in the winter. She says she personally raised the money for them to purchase more than 100 of them. Until her maternity leave, she continued her military service in Kyiv, wearing one of these. War is life is a favorite saying of hers, explaining that in a war she found love and family. And nothing says war is life like maternity wear camo.
Emerald's baby is due in the next few weeks. She's having a girl. Chance and I are back with some final thoughts on the year that was and the year ahead in a moment.
Back now in the final moments of this hour to reflect on the past year of war and life in Ukraine. Jason Bellini, you've spent more time there than probably anywhere else this past year. In this hour, you've shared a lot of the memories of the things that you've witnessed firsthand. What do you expect might change in the next year?
Great question, Chance. What's most predictable right now is an escalation in weaponry on both sides. We know Russia is trying to ramp up its arms production and modernize its military. The Ukrainians eagerly anticipate the arrival of modern Western tanks, longer-range munitions, and they hope eventually Western fighter jets. But we should not forget, here in Ukraine, this is still a people's war, and I expect we'll continue to find more examples of ingenuity and heroism that inspire us, as well as sobering stories of suffering and heartbreak. Chance?
Geopolitically, you see China and Russia, you see the West and U.S. with Ukraine. But I think all the time about those kids you've covered, including some who we don't know their whereabouts at this very moment. And I know you're staying on it. Jason Bellini in Kyiv. As always, my friend, please stay safe. And thank you for watching this Scripps News special, No Surrender, Ukraine 1 year later. To see extended profiles of the people you met this hour, to get the latest on the war in Ukraine, and to go deeper into our reporting, go to scripsnews.com/Ukraine. For Jason Bellini and our team around the world, I'm Chance Seals in Washington.